So I'm really delighted to be here to present today. I've had a lovely time in the fair city of Seattle, and here to talk to you about using time management as a wellness tool. So sometimes we think of wellness in terms of learning how to meditate or taking a yoga class or achieving some better work-life balance, but I think all of that becomes more possible and more likely when we're managing ourselves at work and at home and elsewhere a little bit more mindfully and intentionally. So that's what we'll be talking about today. We're going to start with a little pretest, little question for you. Lawyers are pretty adept people, come to the table with lots of knowledge to begin, and so we'll start with a little quiz. And the question that I want you to think about is, what is most highly correlated with well-being for lawyers? And as you're thinking about this, you can see there's some options for answering there. And you should have on your webinar screen a dialog box for the poll. So you can just indicate your answer right there. So this is just, what do you think it is? Is it autonomy, which connotes a sense of control and intentionality about your work, when and where you work, how you work, what you're working on? Is it things that I consider to be foundational to self-care, like sleep, diet, and exercise? Or is it C, achieving that ever-elusive work-life balance? Maybe it's D, success at work, whatever that means for you. So what do you think is most highly correlated with well-being for lawyers? You can go ahead and mark your answer, and Deborah is going to let me know when we have some responses to share. They're coming in still. Okay, good. My next slide is a further explanation of this. So, okay, there we go. We've got some responses. Deborah is going to read those in.
Okay, we have 5.6% answered autonomy, A. 29.1% answered B, sleep, diet, and exercise. 56.3% C, work-life balance. And 9.1% answered D, success at work.
Great, thank you so much. Those are some really interesting numbers. I would have thought lawyers might put success at work a little higher, but I'm glad to see that we're keeping that all in perspective. There actually is a correct answer here, and it's supported by a study done in 2015 by Florida State University law professor Lawrence Krieger and University of Missouri psychology professor Kenan Sheldon. And they found that the thing that's most highly correlated with well-being for lawyers is autonomy. So that was our lowest response here, but let's think a little bit more about this and learn a little bit more about why autonomy is so important to lawyer well-being. So Krieger and Sheldon conducted this study of 6,200 lawyers in 4 states. And they found that experiences of autonomy, including authenticity, relatedness to others, and competence, most strongly predicted attorney well-being. These large correlations indicate that well-being co-occurs with these experiences, such that it may not be possible to attain thriving without the relative satisfaction of all those needs. And you can see the link there. There's an article about this study available at 83 George Washington Law Review 554, again, 2015. You'll also find in your annotated resource links available in your materials a link to this Law Review article and all the other resources and references that we're going to talk about today. In fact, there are some things in those links that I'm not going to touch on today, so if you really want to take a deep dive, you could peruse through that later. So this is interesting because you all thought that autonomy might be least correlated with well-being, but Lawrence Krieger and Professor Sheldon thought that it was, and their evidence showed it was very highly correlated. So it seems like there's this nexus between autonomy and well-being that we ought to explore a little bit more. So autonomy and well-being. It sounds simple enough, maybe even a little strange given the pretest here, but how are we doing on that? Well, we're not doing great. The American Bar Association has really delved deeply into this issue of lawyer well-being and looked at it in several different ways and also given us some tools to apply in the legal community, in our offices, and also for ourselves. And so what we've learned, starting back in 2016, there was a study that was done by the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation and a report that was issued, which basically said that lawyers had higher rates of mental health concerns that were highest for young lawyers, and they had higher rates of alcohol abuse, nearly twice the control group. Also highest among younger lawyers. So this is a problem that is a growing concern for our profession, particularly considering that younger lawyers are most affected. And also, this is the first major study of lawyer mental health and wellness and addiction in over 25 years. The last one was in 1990 of Washington lawyers, actually. And in that study, they found that the rate of alcohol abuse was similar. It was a similar rate of alcohol abuse, and which is, oh goodness, I have the number here, and it's buried further back in my notes. Here we go. Yeah, it's 21 to 36%. So it's a wide range. But that number has stayed relatively steady. The difference is it's increased among younger lawyers since 1990. For mental health, the rate of depression currently that was measured in 2016 was 28% incidence of depression among lawyers, and in 1990 it was 19%. So that's a kind of a significant jump. There may be cultural and other factors contributing to that, but stress is a huge one. And for the legal profession, the fact that our youngest lawyers are the ones who are suffering the most does not really bode well, for the future of the profession. So we really need to do something to address these issues. And the ABA, again, is on top of it with some resources and materials and tools that I'll be talking about in a few minutes. All right, so a little bit about me before we go too much further here. So I'm a business management coach. I focus really on productivity issues with my clients, and I work with lawyers to think about productivity broadly. This really isn't about how many billable hours that you can attain or have attained. That's just one very rough, and I would say maybe not a great measure of your productivity. It's an important one because that's how the lawyers make their widgets, by those little time entries. We need to be doing that. But we're really going to achieve more in the way of autonomy and wellness if we're thinking about productivity in the bigger sense. So I say, some of my best clients, or the people who need to work with me the most, are the ones who are very busy all the time, but just don't feel like they're getting the output for the busyness that they have. And they're maybe spinning their wheels and not getting as much actually accomplished or done as they'd like. And there's lots of reasons for this. Coaching is a great place to explore that. But that's what I mean by productivity. It's a big picture view of that. And I would say also there's productivity in your personal life as well. So are you able to achieve some of your personal goals that maybe have very little or nothing to do with your role as a lawyer? We like to take a wide-angle view of that. I am a former litigation attorney. I was primarily worked on cases anything involving wheels, so cars, trains, and semi-trucks. I also worked a lot on construction defect cases. And then I transitioned out of law practice and worked as a professional development director at a large business law firm in Portland, and worked with lawyers and the professional staff there in a very different way than I had, of course, when I was an attorney. I transitioned out of that and went to work for myself as a coach, and I also provide law firm retreat facilitation services and other consulting services. And I speak and present on this topic and others. In my personal life, I have 3 teenage boys, and so that, as you can imagine, keeps us very busy, especially when I tell you this one little fact. I have a set of twins in there who are 15, and the oldest is 19 and a freshman at the University of Oregon. So our family life is pretty busy and demanding and extremely rewarding and wonderful, and very, very grateful for it. But it does explain some of my interests outside of work, which include magical devices, because if I could get some magical devices to work for me, life would be so much easier. All right, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my next issue here, which is a little bit more about the magical devices. So next quiz is a little poll on what do you think my favorite magical device is. Now, I assure you this is not just a time waster. There's actually a point to this. So just play along, have a little fun. And so one of my favorite, here's one that could be my favorite, a magic wand. Now, I have it on authority that this is one of the Weasley's wands, one of the Weasley twins, and so you might recognize it if you're a Harry Potter fan. As a busy working mom, there are many uses for this, including opening things and cleaning things, and I probably wouldn't do very much in the way of dueling, but this could be a really useful tool to accomplish more in less time. My other option for a favorite magical device is a time turner, and this is a little necklace. Now, if I were magical, I could make this spin and whirl around in different ways, and Hermione Granger used this in The Prisoner of Azkaban to attend more classes. So that's the time turner. And another favorite or possible favorite magical device is the howler. And this is a letter that Ron Weasley's mother sent to him at Hogwarts. She was very upset with him for having taken out the family car and getting it stuck in a tree. And so she sent this during breakfast and said, Ron Weasley, you are in so much trouble, and embarrassed him in front of all of his friends. And then when it was done, it exploded into flame and a shower of ashes. And that's really what a mother feels like, I think, after having had that discussion with their kids. So I love that one. My last potential magical device is a Remember All, which is this. And this is one of my favorites as well. It's a great potential one. I would say we sort of have some of the capacity of a Remember All in our phones. And so maybe some of us are using those as well. But yeah, so Remember All. So which of these 4, the magic wand, the time turner, the howler, the Remember All, which of these 4 would you say is probably my favorite magical device? So if you haven't already done so, please put your answer in. Do we have some answers online coming up yet? Okay, so we've got some statistics here.
40.6% answered A, magic wand. 36.9% answered B, time turner. 4.4% answered howler.
Well, they obviously don't have teenage boys.
18% answered Remember All.
Okay, great. Well, let's see. How did we do? If you responded time turner, you're correct. This one would really, I think, allow me to get more done in less time, and part of me really fantasizes that that should be possible. And so what I want to say about this is, even though it's a magical device, it is still limited as it still has some limitations. So I'm going to read you the inscription that's on this. You can't see it. It's way too small, but I'll read it to you. It says, I mark the hours, every one, nor have I yet outrun the sun. My use and value unto you are gauged by what you have to do. So as you listen to that, can you think about, how is the time turner limited? It's limited by what? By time itself, because it says, I have yet to outrun the sun. So we can't use the time turner to go beyond one day. In fact, I've heard that the limitation is more like 5 hours. Don't know what happens after that. Maybe slugs come out of your mouth. You might grow horns or a tail or something that will go amiss. If you've watched the Harry Potter movies, you know it can be quite unpleasant. I haven't been able to get this to work, though I've tried. But even if I could, I would still be limited. Now, I'm not magical. I'm what the Harry Potter world would call a muggle, and I'm just, a mere mortal. But do I engage in magical thinking sometimes about what I can accomplish in a day, or how long a task is going to take, or how much energy, attention, or resources I have to throw at something? Am I really thinking about that in a pragmatic, realistic way, or am I engaging in a lot of wishful and magical thinking? And so if that's the case, maybe I should be a little more realistic and even honest with myself about how long a task is going to take, how much I have to put towards it, whether I need to bring in more resources. So unless you have one of these and you can make it work, you probably should pay attention to the rest of the presentation today, because there are some other things that we can do if we're not magical. All right, and the main thing that we can do is to prioritize. So this starts with actually having a sense of your priorities. What are they? And this is kind of a vague, high altitude, big picture place to go. So I'm just going to ask you to sit back, relax, and think about what are your priorities. So having our own priorities helps us manage our time and attention. And it also helps us have more autonomy. So we learned earlier that autonomy is really important to a lawyer's sense of well-being. How can we use priorities to give us a better sense of our own autonomy? Along those lines, the ABA COLAP Path to Lawyer Well-Being Report in 2017 recognized the importance of lawyer autonomy and control, and it said that it included some recommendations to enhance the lawyer's sense of control. And it said on pages 16 and 17, practices that rob lawyers of a sense of autonomy and control over their schedules and lives are especially harmful to their well-being. Research confirms that environments that facilitate control and autonomy contribute to optimal functioning and well-being. So this seems like a pretty important starting place. We want to make sure we're not deluding ourselves with a sense of wishful thinking or magical thinking. And we want to be able to exert some control over what can at work be a very kind of frantic environment, right? I know as most of you are sitting here at your desk, hopefully you're not paying too much attention to the 20 emails you've already received, or the text messages that are flying in, or the message light beeping on your phone. There's so many ways for our attention to be grabbed and our time and energy to be dragged away from what we think is most important in the moment. And so it really becomes a process and a practice and a valuing of what's most important to you in order to combat some of that and to be able to move forward on your most important objectives. So then, in 2018, the ABA elaborated on this idea further with its well-being toolkit for lawyers and legal employers. Again, noting the importance of autonomy and control in well-being. And so there they said the research shows that high job demands paired with a lack of sense of control breeds depression and other psychological disorders. And earlier we heard about a CLE related to burnout. And something else to consider is that burnout and perceived stress are most highly correlated with depression in lawyers. And again, an antidote is to provide a sense of control and autonomy. This is something that the workplace and our employers can provide for us. It's also something we can do for ourselves. And when we do it for ourselves, we can provide it to other people, our coworkers and colleagues. And we can be gracious and thoughtful about honoring their need for autonomy and control as well, and helping them rise to the occasion of managing their workload, managing their schedules in a way that helps them achieve their goals and the client's goals. Along these lines, the ABA came up with some recommendations to consider or to review in your office and see how we're doing, or areas that could be addressed to enhance autonomy and control for the lawyers. One of these is excessive workload. Now, almost every lawyer I know has problems with excessive workload. Even if we maybe don't have as many cases as we'd like, excessive workload comes in the form of maybe doing a lot of administrative tasks that could be better done by someone else, taking on too many responsibilities in the committees that you serve on, having a lot of other responsibilities outside of work, and not having as many resources to throw at them so that you can share the load with, other helpers and vendors and other tools. So excessive workload can certainly mean you just have too much on your plate in terms of cases, but it could also be other sources contributing to that workload. So looking at that. And then another one is tight deadlines, not based on business needs. I don't know any lawyers who have tight deadlines to contend with, but I think what is meant here by the ABA is when you impose a tight deadline because it is, what you think ought to be done or should be achieved, or I should be able to do that. It may not relate to what the client's true need is. It may not relate to the true court deadline. And if it doesn't do that and it puts pressure on you and others around you to meet a tight deadline, then that's not going to be very helpful to creating a sense of autonomy and well-being. Tight deadlines also come up because we just had the best intentions to get to the work, in a timely manner, and then other things came up and interrupted and took us off task, and so we end up with a tight deadline. The end result is the same. It's increased stress for everybody, including you, and it really is something to try to avoid if you can, because you will decrease your sense of stress and you'll increase your sense of control when you have fewer tight deadlines. So making sure you have enough time to do what you need to do. Another recommended area for legal employers to look into is senior lawyers' poor time management habits. So this comes from the idea that a senior lawyer is a little bit insulated sometimes from their decision-making about when and how things should be accomplished, and then the people around them just sort of have to make it happen. And that all filters down into the staff and legal and associates and other lawyers working on the case, and it contributes to a sense of stress for them. And you might think, well, good. When I was a young lawyer, I was stressed too. It's fine. The problem is, as we've seen, young lawyers already have a very high sense of stress that comes from different factors. I mean, one of which might be including that the debt load for lawyers is higher. The housing costs for young lawyers is higher. They just have maybe a very different family setup than we had 30 years ago or 40 years ago when we started practicing. So learning to be sensitive to the needs of others and taking that into account when you're putting together a strategy and a timeline for completing your matters and providing client service. So senior lawyers can do a lot to impact this for themselves and the people that work around them. Another area to review is the expectation that a lawyer would be available 24/7. So just taking for a moment that we know that what lawyers do is really important. Think about your family physician or maybe a specialist that you work with. Are they available to you 24/7? The answer is no, they're not. They have staff, they have on-call service, they have colleagues who might answer their calls in the middle of the night. Now, if you've just had surgery and there's a problem with your recovery, you're likely to be able to get a hold of your surgeon, but that's just one patient or two patients. They have ways of managing this, and yet lawyers think, well, everybody ought to reach me all the time because if I don't allow that type of access, then I'm not going to have any more clients ever. So that type of thinking is kind of on the extremes, and I would just, think about whether what effect that type of thinking is having on your own workload and experience and your ability to serve multiple clients and interests. It really can drag it down. When you work without reasonable opportunities for rest, you go from kind of being on the upswing of the productivity U curve to the downswing. And so then you're working in a way that is just kind of spending good energy after bad, and you just get more and more tired. And when you're not working higher on the productivity bell curve, you're sacrificing things like accuracy and your ability to read and understand other people, which is really important for client relationships or working with opposing counsel. And so there are some very real, impactful consequences of this 24/7 work schedule expectation that are not good for the lawyers and also are not good for legal employers or our clients. We're in a people business. We're providing service performed by people for other people. And, in order to create the best conditions for optimal client service, we really have to pay attention to the people involved in that. And it's not just the end user. In fact, I would argue we must pay attention to the people who are providing the service in order that they can do their best and create the client service experience that we're looking for. All right, so that's the 24/7 work schedule expectations. One of the last areas that they recommend to look at is discretion over where, when, and how to perform work. So this is where we want to think about, how important is it that we sit at our desks in front of a PC and do our work and answer the phone and answer email all day long? First of all, depending on your practice type, that may not be realistic at all. You may have to be in lots of different places during the day. And also, it's not really necessary in terms of how connected we are, even just with some basic tools. And so we're able to do more work away from the desk in other locations. Also taking into account that generationally, for example, some workers might be more comfortable and prefer to work in a variety of settings, and including doing some work at home, maybe a little work in a cafe. Yeah, I'll spend some time in the office for sure, but they tend to be more comfortable with a mobile work environment because that's how it's been their whole life. That's always how they've worked. And then there are people who did not grow up in a mobile work environment, and they're most suited to sit at a desk and get work done there. What we're really going for here is better productivity, happier lawyers, better client service. And if we can achieve some of that by giving people more freedom over when, where, and how to work, that seems like a pretty good trade-off. And so employers are encouraged to look at ways to facilitate that. Also, as we've been talking about here, autonomy includes, control over when, where, and to perform work. That's one aspect of autonomy. And so if we can give that to lawyers or give that to ourselves, then we're going to be contributing to a better sense of well-being as well. All right. Last, I would say, when we do these things for ourselves and we take it upon ourselves to have as much control as we're able to have over our work, when we do that and we share with the people around us, hey, I'm going to be out of the office from 12 to 1 on a run. I'll be back and answer phone calls at that time. And ask our colleagues to, support that by maybe not scheduling a lunch meeting during that time, or holding their question until 1 o'clock, or letting us get back to them. That can be a way that we can support each other in our pursuing well-being, because we need a break in the middle of the day. And when we do that, maybe we also support a broader culture sense of well-being in the legal community and in our workplaces. And we can also make it a priority there. So the point I'm making here is when you do it for yourself, you can also do it for others and support their efforts. And you can begin to place the building blocks in place for a cultural shift toward better well-being in the legal profession. So it's not just about the individual, it's really about all of us. And it's going to take all of us to address some of the problems that the ABA has explained and found in its research, and to bring those numbers down. This isn't about any particular individual having a problem. It's really about a profession that could be doing more to facilitate more well-being and a culture that values people for this very people-oriented service that we provide. Okay, so how do we get at what our priorities are, and why does it matter? So this slide has some questions and a picture on it, all of which kind of take us to this question of, what are your priorities? They are very important for creating a sense of autonomy, because your priorities give you a sense of purpose in your work and life. And so the picture here depicts some of my priorities. So these are my 3 boys and our dog. And we're out on an outing earlier this summer at Beacon Rock State Park, which is in the Columbia River Gorge. I spend a lot of time there. It's really beautiful. And we walked around this area kind of closer to the river, and then hiked Beacon Rock, which was really fun. So this combines several things that relate to my priorities. One is my family life. One is exercise. Another one's getting out in nature. And I was able to do all 3 at once, so the time manager and me loved that because it was very efficient. But think about, for you, what are some of your priorities? And the way that you get at this is, what do you value? What is important to you? And what are your goals? And I would encourage you to think about this both in terms of what's going on for you at work and what's important to you personally and in your home life. And so as you're thinking about that, you have in your materials a worksheet. Looks a little bit like this. I think it's on page 1-4. And so the worksheet says priorities at the top there. And what it asks you to do is to list your top 5 priorities. Compare them with your calendar and task list. So even if you don't have this printed out, you could just take out a piece of paper and a pen and write down, just jot down quickly, what are your top 5 priorities? Thinking about, what do you value? What is important to you? And what are your goals? So we're just going to have just a quick, brief moment here of quiet and let you think about what those might be and write them down. And so as you're writing those down, maybe consider what does your calendar and your task list look like? Are any of your priorities showing up there? Sometimes people will pull out their phone or pull up their calendar and take a look. Think about what's on your to-do list for today. And consider, do your time and energy serve your priorities? Why or why not? So this is an awareness exercise. There's really no correct answers here, but it does serve to increase your awareness of what is important to you and what are your priorities. Are you living in alignment with those priorities? Because if you are, you're going to have more meaning in your life and work. You're going to feel more fulfilled. It's also going to be really so much easier to direct your time and attention and energy toward what matters and what's going to help you achieve your goals. So this is a really important starting point for us. What are your priorities? So now we have time for a poll. So again, you're going to have the opportunity to mark A, B, C, D, or E on, just for you, what is your top priority? Think about which one of these maybe rose to the top for you, like the thing that is, if you were going to rank your priorities, what would be number one? And so the first one up there is self-care, so sleep, exercise, general health, making sure that you see your doctor regularly for the high blood pressure that they're following, or that you're getting regular exercise, that you're getting enough sleep every night so that you can actually perform at your best every day. Sleep is turning out to be a very important component of health and well-being, and I would say, I hate to say this, there's some evidence that lack of sleep and shaving the amount of sleep that we get earlier in life or in midlife can contribute the grounds for dementia later in life. So you don't want to be laying the groundwork for dementia now, and the way that you avoid that is by getting enough sleep and by getting exercise. And enough sleep for an adult is 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So think about that. Even if you struggle with insomnia, maybe you wake up partway through the night, give yourself what they call a sleep window. So 7 to 9 hours every night, maybe preferably at the same waking time or go to sleep time and waking time, and give yourself the opportunity to rest and sleep during that time. Obviously, for lawyers, it's not going to be the case that we can achieve that every single day, but if we can get to 50 or 80%, all the better. It looks like we might have a question. Yeah.
Have the results.
We have the results. Okay, good. Well, why don't you go ahead and read some results? That would be good.
28.4% answered A, self-care. 55.5% answered B, family life and responsibilities. 9.2% answered work or legal career, and 0.6% answered volunteer work, D. 6.4% said other.
Thank you. Yeah, so on the other, that would just be anything that's not listed there, obviously. For some people, this might have a spiritual or faith-based component that, really rises to the top for them. I think it's interesting that only 6.6% said volunteer work. Sometimes we can really derive a lot of satisfaction and direction and meaning from volunteer work, but it also can add to our plate in ways that we need to, be managing as well. So very good. Well, like I said, there's no correct answer here, but I would say, at least speaking for myself, I learned something about this every time I get on an airplane. And I learned something about self-care and helping others. Can anybody think of what that is? Just think for a moment. What do we learn on an airplane about the balance between self-care and helping others, service to others? They say, secure your own air mask first, then assist others. So for me, I really do need to take care of some of those self-care foundational things before I can be of any service to anybody else at home or at work. If you have any kind of a health condition, I had back surgery 2 years ago. That requires me on a daily basis to take care of some very basic exercises and activity that I need to get in every day. If I do that, I'm better able to show up and participate at home and for my clients. So that's something worth considering. If you're not showing up on your priorities at all, maybe think about a way to get yourself in there and nudge your self-care up the ladder, because it really will help you achieve your goals and be present for your family, for work, and for other obligations that you have. All right, so we're at a time here where you can submit questions, and Deborah will be collecting those and will read them to me in a couple of minutes. We'll also have time for questions at the end, but right now, why don't you take a minute, if you have a question, to type it into the Q&A dialog box there. I'm going to talk for a couple more minutes, and then I'll take a couple questions. All right. So all well and good. We have priorities. We know what they are, but we work in such a way that it's really hard to get our priorities to rise to the top. And so how do we promote priorities? So promoting your priorities is really important, fundamental stepping stone toward autonomy and well-being. So it's important that we learn how to promote our priorities. And so the first way that you do that is to say yes to your priorities. So look at that list of 4 or 5 things that you wrote down and say, yes, these are important to me. This is my reason for being here. This is going to be my legacy in life. And it's going to make every moment worth living if I can have more of these 5 things in my life. So say yes to them, and to understand that your attitude and orientation to your priorities is also going to influence how other people think about those, both in relationship to you and for themselves. So this is a really important step. Number 2 is to relate your priorities to personal and professional goals. So if you can understand, why is it important if self-care is your number 1? Why is that important to your personal goals or your professional goals? Maybe I have a personal goal to run a marathon. So if that's the case, I really have to stick to a training schedule, or I'm really not going to be prepared for the marathon. What if I have a professional goal to I don't know, get a specific trial experience or build a practice in a new practice area? If you're busy running your batteries down to nothing every day, you're really not going to have the ability to be creative and thoughtful and bring energy and enthusiasm to the work that you're doing. So it is important that you have some of the basics of self-care in place so that you feel physically and emotionally good coming to the work. So find a way to understand why your priorities matter to your personal and professional goals. Next would be communicate priorities and manage expectations. This is one where lawyers, as great communicators and persuaders, really kind of fall down on the task when it comes to communicating and persuading others about our own lives and needs. And so something to think about here is that you already have the building blocks for this. You already have the skills, perhaps even better than others do, in place to communicate with others about priorities and to manage expectations. So what do I mean about these 2 areas? Communicating your priorities is to talk to your team at work about, what are the priorities for the week, and maybe even what are your priorities for the day, so that they understand where they fit in and how their work fits in with what you're doing. Also, that you might need some support at certain times of the day in order to work on a project uninterrupted, for example, or get out of the office for lunch and a short walk, because these things are going to make you better able to perform later in the day, for example. Managing expectations comes up around maybe informing your clients from the get-go when they hire you about how best to reach you and what their expectations can be for when and how you will respond. If you set up the expectation or just say nothing, they might think that they can just reach you at any time and you'll respond by text message or any other medium they choose to respond to their questions and needs, on a moment's notice. Now, we as lawyers know that that may not be the best way to provide the legal services that they need. There are also rules and other considerations around how we communicate with our clients that could cut against that. So if we can set the stage with our clients around, how you'll respond, when you'll respond, and also, most importantly, what to do if they feel like they have an emergency and a really urgent situation. What is the mechanism they should use? What is the path they should go down to make sure that you've seen it? And here I would say it's not necessarily call my cell phone and interrupt me no matter what I'm doing. It should involve, someone who's always available to answer that call, give you the information, so that you'll see it, and then you can decide what to do with it, because the client's sense of urgency may not match your sense of urgency given what you know about the situation. So managing expectations is really important. This also comes up in the office in that you might find that it helps to communicate with your team about when you're going to be available and where you're going to be at certain times of the day, and that you want to have time to work on certain projects, and you're asking them for help in terms of scheduling that with you. All right, and then another one is to delegate for empowerment, and this one relates to the idea that when we delegate, we empower ourselves and everyone else around us. When we don't delegate, there's no empowerment, least of all for you. So if you're one of these people who says, I don't delegate, it takes too much time, I could do it myself better and faster, what you're doing is your own work and the work of other people around you who you're paying and not giving work to. You're also denying them the opportunity to have their own development experience and to learn and grow and become better able to serve the needs of your practice. So is there going to be a learning curve? Is it going to be painful for everybody while that learning curve is going on? Yes, that's 100% true. But the way that we work by just hoarding all the work for ourselves or just declining to accept help from other places, that is not a recipe for long-term success. In order to go up the career ladder and to achieve more and do more over time, we really do need to be delegating to others to make that happen. Sometimes we're delegating to a vendor, sometimes we're delegating to technology, but often we're delegating to another person. And we need to recognize that when we do that, we are empowering them to learn and grow and develop in important ways for them and for our practice. So I encourage you to really think of ways that you can delegate more and be confident in that. The last suggestion I have here about promoting priorities is to defer or decline lower priority items. In other words, learning how and when to say no. I know we hate the concept that we would have to say no, and sometimes we will even say, well, I can't say no. That's not true. We can say no. It's always an option. But sometimes it's better to think about the way we say no. So is it, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that? Or is it to provide some context for the no? Or maybe it's to say, I would love to do that, and I will have time to work on that a week from now. Is your timeline able to expand to accommodate that? And if not, having a dialogue and discussion about that. So it really does require, again, more communication by you to really get across the idea that it's not that you're opposed to doing something or that you wouldn't or won't. It's that, they're coming to you and you've already got a full plate, and now you've got to try and figure out how to reassess the priorities during that time to get that done. And if it's a lower priority item for you, then you really should think about whether it should be on your plate at all, or maybe it's an opportunity for someone else that should be offered to someone else instead of you. All right. So, do we have any questions so far?
We have quite a few. We have quite a few people asking about how new or young attorneys might advocate for more autonomy, advocate for that sort of mental health or well-being time, and even positively influence the firm culture around them when they have very little of the control and are doing a lot of the work.
Yep, that's a tough one. It's really hard. I think it starts with really knowing yourself and being clear on what your priorities, goals, and objectives are, and relating that to your professional development. And so as you map out a course for your professional development in conjunction with others at your firm, maybe you have a professional development department, maybe you have a managing partner or a practice group chair or a mentor, you can be talking with them about what your vision is. If you don't have a vision for yourself, the firm's vision for you is always going to be bill as many hours as you can and get as many clients as you can and do it faster, please, now. But if you have a vision for yourself and you've thought out how you're going to accomplish those things and why it's important to you and to the firm, you will get a good reception, I think, for that discussion. And again, it's really about communication and kind of an ongoing discussion that you'll have with the people that you work with. So this is not an easy answer for sure. You will need support sometimes to have this sort of discussion over time, and I encourage you to reach out to colleagues and friends to support you as you work through these issues in your office. And just always have a sense of, discernment about, is this sitting right with me? Is this right for me? And how do I shift the circumstances here to better meet my goals and the firm's goals? Yeah, we have time for one more.
We also have questions along the lines of could you speak a little to attorneys who, for whom work is a priority for really pressing financial reasons? Maybe they're a solo practitioner or et cetera, and that calculation is a little bit different.
Right.
What do you say to those kinds of clients of yours?
What do I say to them about
putting these priorities? How do they approach the priorities when work puts itself primary, even though you might want to put other things ahead of it, but for financial reasons, you must put work as a larger priority.
Sure. So if work is your top priority, more power to you. And if that works for you, go ahead. I would encourage you to still have yourself on your priorities list, but also to recognize that, there's 24 hours a day, there's how many hours in a week. There is a place and a time to put yourself on that list. And if wellness and health is important to you, it's got to be something that you do and make time for. So don't expect to have health and wellness and a sense of mission and accomplishment if you're never making time for it. If you're just constantly subject to other people's priorities and needs, your needs and priorities will never come up the ladder enough to get your time and attention. It's just a fact. So you've got to find a way to find that balance. And by better managing how you spend your time, we'll talk in a minute about some tools you can apply for that. By better managing your time and managing yourself as a resource, you're going to find little pockets to fit in a walk, the healthy meal, the yoga class. And you just need to understand that there's times you're going to have to say no to something that's a lower priority, less pressing, not on fire item, and say yes to your priority in the moment. Yeah. Okay. I hope that's all right for whoever asked it. We're going to go ahead and move on. So now we're going to talk about, this is why you all signed up for this CLE. You were thinking you'd get some pointers on, best time management and organization and some best practices. And these tools are helpful, but only after you've considered your priorities. So that's why we spent a lot of time thinking about and understanding that aspect of it. So your first tool is your calendar. Is your calendar your friend or your foe? Depending on the calendar, you might feel like you wake up and already you're under the gun and behind schedule, and then you just spend the whole day trying to catch up. If we can be more thoughtful about what goes on the calendar, we're actually going to do a lot better. So number one, put all your deadlines and due dates on your calendar. This is, rule number one for lawyers and legal professionals, right? And I would say, I would also like to see lawyers put all of their personal deadlines and due dates on their calendar too. And there should be a view of your calendar that shows you everything in your life going on at once. So maybe not everyone has access to that view, but you should as the lawyer. So you can see, for example, you have a motion for summary judgment that's due on the same day that you're going to be submitting your documents for the mortgage refinance, or maybe the next day is the school counselor appointment and you have some things you need to prepare for that. If you can have that information on the calendar, it doesn't take you by surprise. And then you can do item number 2 on this list, which is a weekly preview. So you're looking a week ahead. I have a client that calls this their buffer, and he started out by putting a weekly preview in place, a weekly buffer. Now it's like a 2-week buffer. And what he means by that is nothing goes on the calendar within those 2 weeks that he doesn't get like specific permission from him. So he has staff scheduling him. And so he knows for the next 2 weeks what to expect on his calendar. But for others of us, even if you're just taking time once a week to look at what's coming up, what are some of the due dates and deadlines on your calendar? What are the hearings and client meetings and board meetings or anything else that you need to prepare for? And then be honest with yourself about How much time is it going to take to prepare for the 2 depositions and hearing that I have, and then be able to go to the client meeting later in the week with a presentation? How am I going to allocate my time this week to make that all happen? And ideally, you will have trained your staff and trained yourself that when you put an appointment on your calendar, you automatically include some prep time at a specific time and place relative to that item. So if you're not seeing little pockets for that, you know what's going to happen. You're going to be doing it at midnight, and that's really not putting your best foot forward for your client or yourself. So think about ways that you can build in time into your week to prepare for things that are coming up. The other thing you can do is if you're double booked, that happens a lot nowadays with digital calendars. So you can see that coming and you can move things around in advance and defer lower priority meetings and reschedule them. You can also put resources in place that you're going to need at the time. So, for example, it's always helpful for my family when we do our weekly preview together to think about how is my son getting from soccer practice to grandma's house afterwards, particularly if I'm not available or my husband's not available. What are we going to need to do to make sure that happens? And instead of scrambling at the last minute to make it happen, I know 3 or 4 days ahead of time exactly how it's going to happen, and I've confirmed with the person who's doing it. So that decreases my sense of stress because I didn't have to scramble, and when the time comes, it's just going to smoothly happen, and I can focus on whatever other thing that I'm doing at that time. We can also use day blocks, and we can designate certain days on the calendar when we might be more focused on working in the office at our desk and other days when we're going to be more out of office. And so one way to think about this would be like, in general, if I'm going to be out of the office, it should be on a Tuesday or Thursday. And I'll try to clump my appointments around that. And then you're getting some time efficiencies built in there around when you leave the office and come back to the office, there's at least an hour of time that you're losing between wrapping up what you're doing, traveling to your destination, having your meeting, and coming back and getting situated again to work. You're really losing more time than you're spending in the activity that you're going to do. So minimize the number of times that you make that transition in a week, in a month, in a year, and you'll end up with having more time at your hands to work with or leave the office early or whatever you want to do. Another way to think about this is, and I mentioned it before, think about your workday in terms of time blocks. So if you know that you have prep time coming up for a deposition, for example, or you need to draft a brief, or you need to prepare documents for a closing, what you could be doing is actually putting that on your calendar as time blocked out for work. And we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of deep versus shallow work. And there's this fantastic book by Cal Newport called Deep Work. And it's Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. And he is an academic in information technology and a writer, and he thinks a lot about how we can, work in ways that are more effective. And so what he says in Deep Work on page 97 is, in an ideal world, one in which the true value of deep work is accepted and celebrated, we'd all have access to something or to a work environment and culture designed to help us extract as much value as possible from our brains. Now, he is talking here specifically to information workers, but aren't lawyers information workers and legal professionals? We are extracting value from our brains, and it's based on judgment, education, experience, and we're combining all of that to put out an intellectual product. So we are knowledge workers. Instead, we find ourselves in distracting open offices where inboxes cannot be neglected and meetings are incessant. A setting where colleagues would rather you respond quickly to their latest email than produce the best possible results. I don't know any lawyers who are opposed to producing the best possible results. I think that's what we're all here to do all the time. But we need to understand when we're being called to respond to emails quickly and other distractions, we're really not being put in the place to provide the best possible results to our clients. As a reader of this book, in other words, you're a disciple of depth in a shallow world. So shallow work is all of that work that we do on an interrupted basis that maybe is more administrative in nature, requires a little less brain power. The deep work is the brain power work where, the steam's coming out of your ears. If you do that in concentrated segments and at times of day when you have the most energy to put into it, you're going to work more effectively with fewer errors, also important to lawyers. We want to be more accurate, right? And you're going to feel better at the end of it. Because when you were in law school, you loved working like that. That's what you got to do, and then you get out into the working world and you've got some more things to contend with. So what this book is saying, and what I think is true based on working with my clients, is make some time for deep work. Create some prep time for your next project or your next hearing, and actually do it without interruption. While you're preparing for the hearing for client A, do not look at email from client B. Save that for later. Maybe you scan for fires. Maybe you have someone else looking to make sure that the world hasn't all of a sudden gone flat and everything is sliding off. But short of that, give the hearing tomorrow your full attention. You'll prepare faster. You'll do it better. You'll remember more. You'll be more accurate. And you're going to feel better at the end of it. So I encourage you to give this a try. So we have a lucky winner of this book. We're going to mail it to you. And we picked a number today from our registrants, number 777, which is my lucky number. And that was Hillary Graber. So Hillary, if you're online, would you please just type into the Q&A box to let Devora know that you're here, and we will get this book to you. So happy reading. All right. So the next thing that we often need to contend with is email. And email is a beast. And I know the day is coming when email will be dead, but for right now, and given the way the legal profession kind of moves slowly through things, email's here to stay, and we probably need to learn how to manage it. This is how I feel about email. Just sort of crash lands in your inbox. And then you have to kind of figure out what to do with it. So here are some rules that I've developed for taming email, and also keeping in mind email comes with its own false sense of urgency. Email is other people's priorities landing in your life, and now you have to try and decide what to do with them. And the thing to remember here is that you, as the legal professional, you make the triage decision. You know what's on your plate, you know what's coming up, you know what the priorities are for the other clients that you're working for that day, and you really need to be thoughtful about when and how to engage with email. So rule number 1, you are the boss, not your email. Just because the email landed in your inbox does not mean that you have to read it or respond to it right now. In fact, really good practice to turn off your notifications on all your devices and look at email on your own schedule. I mean, studies tell us you're still going to look at your email probably 40 times an hour, which is way too often. But don't feel like if the notification is turned off, you're going to miss it somehow. That's totally not going to happen. Check messages on your own schedule. So think about what time of day, when you have breaks, or when do you want to check email. And at that time, you can do things like just scan for fires. Just look through and decide, is there something here that I really need to attend to? And otherwise, it can wait until another time in the day when I'm better suited to deal with email. You can also respond to emails by deleting them outright. The ones that don't need a response and really don't need your attention. Just go ahead and delete it. Don't even open it. And then other emails, they're going to maybe just be fine with a one-word reply. And you can talk to your colleagues about, I'm not going to send as many thank yous, and you don't need to send them to me, and we'll just reduce our overall email traffic by doing that. The thank you will be, assumed. And you can also respond with a yes or no answer. And just, again, tell your colleagues, it's not that I'm being rude or curt. I'm just really trying to be efficient with the time that I spend working on email. All right, and then another rule is use rules and unsubscribe. So you can designate a folder for certain types of email to go into. You can also use a service like unroll.me, probably more for home than for work, but that will allow the unsubscribe process to happen quickly and easily, kind of at a click of a mouse. You can also set a rule for any email that has the word unsubscribe in it to go to a specific folder, and then you and maybe your legal assistant can go through that periodically and actively unsubscribe from those. Another rule is to send late day replies. So this actually helps us by slowing down the whole process. Now, when I started practicing law 30 some odd years ago, we had mail. And we didn't send, documents by email. Email was used kind of like to make arrangements to meet at a restaurant or schedule a phone call. It became a lot more than that, obviously. But, it was a couple days turnaround. And so we had time to think. We had time to process. And now with email, we get this urgency around, we have this high-level legal question we need resolved, and we want to do it right now. And we all know that you've got to consider more things than you can in the 2 minutes it takes to type out an email response. So for certain emails, you want to be really allowing yourself the time to respond in a more full manner. So one way that we can buy ourselves time is by sending replies later in the day, and that's either by doing email later in the day, which is one of the things I recommend doing. Save your mornings for deep work. Afternoons are for interrupted work, and email is definitely interrupted work. So you're going to send later day replies to slow the process down. All right, our third tool is the task list. So task lists are interesting. At the very bottom, you see that there's case list, which every lawyer, of course, should have a case list, and it should be exhaustive and inclusive. And it should include not just the names and status of your cases, but what are some of the projects in the works for those matters, and who is doing them, and what status is that work? What's the progress of those items? And then meeting with your team regularly to go over the case list and update it. If a case list isn't updated at least every 2 weeks, that's probably not often enough. So make sure that your case list at least is an every 2 week update, preferably with a meeting with your team to go over it. So from the case list, you're going to get some tasks, and your tasks might include work relevant to matters you're handling, administrative matters related to the business side of your practice, and also might have some personal things that you need to take care of. But here are some ways to think about building a better task list. One is to consider whether the work that is being asked of you on the task list is urgent or important. We want to spend more and more time doing important work and less time doing urgent work. And the good news is, when we engage with important work, when we make time for and specifically set aside time and energy to engage in important tasks, maybe those deep work times that we talked about, you're actually going to reduce the amount of time that you have to spend working on urgent matters. So as important work goes up, urgent matters go down. You're still going to have some urgency around matters that come in and tasks that come in that are urgent, but they're just not that important. So what do you do with those? Well, you can delegate them. Maybe you have to quickly put them out and take care of them yourself. But I would just say try to contain that and don't let it take you too far off your tasks for the day. You'll also may need to reprioritize when urgent tasks come in, and sometimes it can just feel like high tide, rolling in. And that's when you just need to recognize that's what's happening, and you reprioritize and know that low tide is coming, and you will be able to get caught up. There's also a 1-3-5 task list, and so that is something you'll find in the annotated resource list. And the concept there is that there's one task that's the most important task. There's up to three medium-sized tasks, and then 5 smaller items. Now, I would say I have a little trouble getting the 1-3-5 task list done in a day, but it is a way that you can kind of focus and better understand and get your arms around all the different sorts of tasks that you're working on. Another type of task list is one that my ADHD clients really appreciate. So lawyers who have ADHD and they're trying to manage that, how that impacts how they work. And this is the may-do, must-do task list. And so this is the idea that there's certain tasks today that have to get done, and then those are the must-do items. And then there's a variety of tasks that are the may-dos, and they have a lower priority or urgency, and then you can choose which of those you'll do after you do the must-do items. Another type of task list, now this is my personal favorite, and I have a number of clients that use this as well. I call it the Post-it note task list, and it's just a standard Post-it note, and all you do is you just write on here what you're going to try and accomplish in a day, and if it doesn't fit, you can't do it. It's too much and too many. So it does really keep you honest, and I would urge you not to use the tiniest possible handwriting, like actually use your normal handwriting. You can also combine it with the 1-3-5 or some version thereof. Maybe the 1-2-3 version of that would be better. And yeah, like the other thing you can do is rank them. So once you get your 3 to 5 tasks that you're going to complete in a day, you rank them so that the most important one is at the top and the least important one is at the bottom. And then at the end of the day, you get to do the best thing. You crumple it up, you throw it away, and then you feel like you've actually accomplished something. You know, you leave the office with a sense of accomplishment. All right, so that's the task list. So now, this is the point at which, one more thing about task lists. So I just gave you a few ideas and options there, and I would say the best one is the one you'll use. So if you want to investigate apps and project management spreadsheets and all, go for it. Do whatever you think will work. But if it's too complicated or has any kind of a barrier to use, like I have to open my phone up or whatever, it may not be the best one for you. So really take the time to experiment and figure out which one is your best one and use it over and over again until it becomes habitual. That's the best one for you to use. All right, implementing. So back to the worksheet. On page 1-5 of your materials, there's another worksheet, and it says goals at the top. So this is where the time that you spent in the CLA today amounts to something or doesn't. It's really easy to take your materials and then just file them away or shove them in an email folder somewhere, intending to read them later. Leave them on your desk, move them to your credenza later, and then eventually in the recycling bin. But if we do a couple of things right now, then you can actually make a little progress on your goals, really without doing too much else. So the first thing to do is take out that pen and paper again and write down a goal for the coming week in each category or even just in one or more categories. It doesn't have to be all 3. So did you learn anything today about setting or promoting priorities that really rang true for you? And you thought, I could do that. I want to try that idea out. Write that down as something that you could do this week to set priorities or promote them. And then the next category or option would be, was there an organizing tool or strategy that we talked about today that rang true for you, that resonated for you, and you think, I would like to try that one. That seems like it could really help me. And write that down. And then the last area is think about are there any quality of life goals that you have that you'd like to work on? Like, I really need to get out of the office 3 times a week, and I'm going to schedule, 3 days a week where I get out for a half an hour walk. I'm going to look at my calendar and actually put it in there, and then the trick is move it, don't cancel it, right? But make some kind of a wellness or quality of life oriented goal. And to increase your likelihood of achieving your goals, you need to make them specific and achievable. Write them down with pen and paper. There's something that happens in our brains with the mind-body connection around physically writing things down with pen and paper. It encodes it in a very specific way for easier retrieval. I think it also brings it more into your awareness, both conscious and subconscious. And so just the fact that you wrote it down with pen and paper can really make a difference. If you type it into notes, there's less retention going on inside your brain. When you type something, that's for the computer to retain. When you handwrite it, that's going to lay down in a very specific way in your brain. Also, you can say your goal out loud. So you can, preferably to another person, but even your dog will work. You could just say it out loud to yourself. When you do this, you increase the likelihood of achieving your goal or working on it. It brings it more into your everyday awareness. And then last, schedule 15 minutes a week from now to review these and repeat this process. Take yourself down to your favorite local coffee shop and get a cup of coffee and sit down with your sheet of paper and ask yourself, how did I do on these goals? Are there ways in which I could approach this differently, or do I need to take the next step down this path of a particular goal? And just take a minute to review. It really doesn't take very long. If you find that you're having trouble getting traction, you're not really able to implement any of these goals that you've set for yourself, you can enlist help. Lawyers are not people that think about asking for help from others, but we really do need to do that. It's an important resource that we have at our disposal. And what you'll find is other people struggle with some of the same issues you're struggling with, and they will benefit from helping you with your struggles. So if you can give someone the opportunity to learn what's going on in your life, you might give them a window to address some of the things going on in their life. It's kind of a two-way gift, two-way street there. So you can enlist a colleague, a coworker, or a friend and have a discussion about these issues. Coaching is also a great place to learn to get traction on your goals. And coaching provides a process that takes you through over time, working on discerning goals, discerning what's important to you, setting goals, and making a plan to reach them. You also learn to develop some resiliency to keep going when things are difficult, and a coach should provide some encouragement for that. And then you should be able to recognize when you've had success. A lot of times we don't recognize our own success because we are very hard on ourselves and have really high expectations, and then even when we do make progress and achieve some success, we think, oh, well, that wasn't good enough, it doesn't count. A good coach is going to help you recognize that success was hard fought, hard won, and you should really take the benefit of that to fuel your future successes going forward. It's an important piece of motivation. All right. Let's see. And then another thought we have here is coming back to this idea of prioritizing wellness. And what I want you to think about is that wellness is something we do. It is not something that we have. Or in other words, you won't have it unless you do it. So make some time to do wellness through priorities. So this is why we're going to prioritize wellness. How do we use time management as a wellness tool? Make wellness a priority. So some of the ways we can do that. You need to, if wellness is something that's important to you, assert it as a priority in your own work and life. And just be honest and say, look, I can't show up and do great things at work if I'm exhausted and overwhelmed. I really need to do some things to address that in order to better serve my clients and be a better coworker and colleague. And get help if you're having trouble addressing that. Again, just talk to anyone around you that you trust. Maybe contact some of the resources available through the bar, take a class, or work with a counselor, or hire a coach. There's lots of different ways that you can ask for help. It's always going to be available. And then another thing that we can do is learn more about how to support wellness in your office, in your workplace. Advocate with your employer to make wellness a priority for the firm. Is wellness reflected anywhere in the firm's values? I guarantee you providing excellent client service is reflected. Is there a connection between the wellness and well-being of the people providing that service and that excellent client service? If you can help make that nexus, it's going to make a lot of sense for your employer to take a look at the materials that the ABA has prepared, the Wellbeing Toolkit and the Path to Wellbeing report. And so you can also just pick those materials up and read them for yourself and start coming up with plans to support those in your workplace. And then, others may join you in that if they find out that you have an interest in it. Another thing you can do is to support lawyer wellness in the legal community. And there are things that bar organizations and law schools can do to support lawyer well-being. And those things are also outlined in the ABA materials, which are available in the annotated resource links in your course book. So if you can learn a little bit more about wellness, practice it in your own life, and empower others to do the same, you'll contribute to a better sense of well-being in the legal community as well. So we'll want to make sure that we're putting wellness on our calendar, scheduling self-care, spacing out appointments, and doing some deep work. Put wellness on your to-do list. Take an exercise class. Learn to meditate. Maybe take that webinar on meditation that's coming up. Make a grocery list and cook a healthy meal. Make that doctor appointment. So here again are the lawyer wellness resources that I've mentioned, and I just encourage you to look at those. It's the Path to Lawyer Wellbeing Report from 2017 and the Wellbeing Toolkit for Lawyers and Legal Employers. And yeah, we're getting toward the end here. So if you have questions, now's the time to type those in. Deborah will raise her hand and let me know that she's got a couple ready to go. While we're waiting for that, I just want to say thank you for having me here today. It's been a pleasure, and I've learned a lot in preparing for this. It really required me to take a deep look at some resources that I had skimmed through previously and to recognize some of the connections between the importance of how we manage ourselves through time management and how that can contribute to our sense of autonomy and well-being that's so important to both us as individuals and the legal profession. And I also wanted to let you know I offer free consultation to anyone who contacts me and requests it 30 minutes by phone. My contact information is right there. It's also on the last slide of your materials. And to schedule a 30-minute free consultation, all you need to do is call or text or email me, and it's quite simple and easy to do. Along those lines, this is how you can reach me. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I post there frequently, and I have a website with a blog and other events that I'm involved in. That's at tcbcoaching.com, and you're always welcome to reach out to me with your individual questions and comments, either by phone or email. All right, do we have a couple questions?
We do. Before we go to questions, I do want to mention that today's PowerPoint slides will be included in the course book. So attendees just need to use the same link they already have and give us about 2 weeks tops, and they'll be included as PDFs in the course book. Okay. Well, we have a question about we got a lot of great questions today, so we are consolidating a little bit. But we all live with everyday stress. How does one know when everyday stress is beginning to look like unhealthy levels of stress? And you might want to take some of these steps. Are there any warning signs?
Yes. So anytime one of your major life functions is inhibited by the experience of stress, you really want to be paying attention to that. I would say for most lawyers I know, we can just assume stress is a problem. It's kind of one of the hazards of what we do. So we really should be building in ways to release stress and cope with stress, throughout the week and throughout the month and year. And we do that through things like making sure you take all of your vacation time. If you're a solo practitioner, you can and should take vacation. There are ways to do it, and I would be happy to talk with anyone who struggles with that. It involves reaching out to others and getting help and communicating with your clients, but it can definitely be done, and it's really important that you take a full break from your work periodically. So that would be one. Also, just what can you do on a daily basis to get more physical activity? Moving around is something that our bodies need to do so desperately that even right after surgery, they make you stand up and walk because it leads to better physical outcomes. And I think that's true even if you're otherwise in good health and you sit at a desk all day long. Really need to get up and move, so finding more ways to do that. So I think in answer to your question, assume that stress is there and assume that it needs to be dealt with, and be building in ways to have wellness be more of a part of your life, both on a daily basis and then on a monthly or yearly basis with things like vacation time and maybe time to recover after a particularly intense or difficult experience. A lot of lawyers and judges deal with vicarious trauma from the very difficult and painful matters that we need to be involved in. And don't discount the amount of stress and trauma that causes to you individually. And it's important to take time to recover from that and allow your colleagues time to recover. it can make a lot of difference in our optimal functioning later on. Do we have another question?
We had quite a few questions on client access and sort of that 24/7 idea. Maybe if someone's a public defender and the culture and the need is to be contactable 24/7 for their clients, or if private practice clients have access. And then we had another question related about cell phone. What do you think about attorneys giving out their personal cell phones? If you could just speak to that notion for a little bit.
Okay, boy, public defenders, you have the world's hardest job. I think you have to know your practice area and also understand the places where you do have a little more control. If you can involve a service of any kind or technology of any kind to create some kind of a buffer so that you can take those moments when you need to be accessible and, make them less of a drain on your overall time, so that it's dealt with quickly and easily, and maybe through another person like a staff member or an online receptionist or something, so that you just have a little bit of a buffer between yourself and that stimulus or demand. It gives you a chance to really think about what's going on instead of just responding to it, and building in systems and structures to give yourself a break from time to time. The other thing, which again is going to be difficult for a public defender, for example, is to just know this is part of how you work, and so you need to really structure your life and your time so that you're not, if you're constantly living in this upper margin of productivity where you just really reach the limit, and try to work lower on that scale so that you're down in this area and then you have room to bump up. When we always work up here, we don't give ourselves any margin. We're using the margin on a regular basis. That's like in personal finances, living without any savings. You don't want to do that. It's really not the best practice. The better practice is to give yourself room to move and accommodate the highs and lows. And so if you can do that. The other one was not the public defender, but what was the other question?
If you have a position on personal cell phones, giving those out to clients in general.
So I know some lawyers for whom it's like really important to be able to give the client access to a cell phone number, and sometimes it's sort of a marketing tool in a way, right? You want the client to feel like they have special access to you. So what I would say is maybe consider getting a second cell phone, because you could then really dedicate all of your work-related communications to a cell phone number that you can give out to your clients, and then you would have maybe your personal cell phone that you keep for other matters. And then you just decide, how you're going to manage that. Yes, the phone calls will come to that dedicated cell phone number, but maybe that those messages and those phone calls also can reach other people on your team, and they can have a crack at the apple before you have to respond to it. And so just being really creative and thoughtful about that. And then there's plenty of lawyers for whom they just don't do that, and they provide other ways for their clients to reach them. The client needs to know that they can reach you if they have an emergency, and they also will develop over time a better sense of what an emergency is, because what the client thinks is an emergency and what you think often are two different things. But if you can just communicate about that and set expectations early on, and I was taught beat down their expectations and then over deliver. That's going to make for happier clients than letting them set the expectation really high. You struggle to meet it, and then they're unhappy. So you want to bring that expectation down and then jump over it if you can. Yeah. All right.
Would you like one more question?
Sure. I think we have time.
Yep. Do you have any tips for appropriate ways to interview future employers to find out if they really value wellness?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think one way would be even stealthily, really investigate their website and look for things like a wellness committee or, someone who is dedicated to implementing the recommendations of the ABA. You can also ask questions of people around the firm. Maybe past employees are a good a good place to start. People that you know and trust, especially. There are lots of websites that you can go to that will tell you about, people's experiences in the firms, both when they were there and have left. I think always take that with a grain of salt, because anonymous testimonials, may have some sour grapes in there. On the other hand, wouldn't you rather work for a place that's getting great reviews from their past employees? I like the idea that you would seek out people in your network who have either worked in that place or, worked with the lawyers who are there, and ask them some specific questions. You can also bring it up in the interview. That's going to be a judgment call on your part, whether you think this is the type of workplace that's going to be open to discussing that. And the way you would know that answer to that question is that you've checked other sources, like their website, like talk to people who've worked there in the past. And then you can better gauge, whether that should be a question you're going to ask. And, if the answer is, I don't feel comfortable asking about this in the interview, you might have to ask yourself, should I be, is this someplace I want to work? What's this really going to be like? That's a clue in and of itself. And always, if you're in a law firm, find a channel through which you can bring the ABA materials and understand them, digest them yourself, become someone who can teach the firm about them. There's some really great evidence-based information in there that's pretty hard to dispute, and some really good tips for moving forward. And so you just plug into whatever makes sense. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time to think about these issues. I hope you leave here thinking about what's important to you and your priorities. Use the tools we've discussed here today to promote your own well-being and that of others, and help the legal profession become healthier, happier, and more satisfying for us all. Thank you so much.